Ethan Drake had never intended to become an unwitting champion in a cosmic contest, much less in a place as grand and mysterious as Velkaris Prime. Yet, fate, or chance, had a way of entangling mortals in the threads of destiny, weaving a tapestry more intricate than any mind could imagine. On a sweltering afternoon, amidst the vibrant expanse of the Velkari Central Market, Ethan found himself locked into a future he had never sought. With a mere accidental bump, he stepped onto the stage of a drama that would decide the fate of not just two individuals, but the deeper traditions and freedoms of an ancient civilization. He was a mechanic by trade, a humble soul content to ply his gifts of tinkering and repairs in the cargo hold of the Nebula Runner, a freighter whose routes traversed the known galaxy. Aboard that sturdy ship, he dreamed of neither empire nor conquest, only of new experiences and the hope that each port would prove more interesting than the last. Yet, that day, he learned how a single instant could spark an unrelenting chain of events. Velkaris Prime, the heart of the Velkari domain, buzzed with color and delight. Towering spires of gleaming metal rose high above the busy streets. Streets that thrummed with energy, throngs of travelers from across the quadrant meandering along marble walkways, and marketplaces shimmering beneath intricate canopies. Here, bright alien fruit was stacked in pyramids at open-air stalls, and the soft hum of manifold languages intermingled. The planet itself was a tapestry of modern design and old tradition, caught between the boundaries of technological advance and the deep-seated rituals that had held sway for centuries. On the day it all began, Ethan wore simple cargo pants, a worn jacket, and well-used boots coated with starship grease. His face was streaked with fatigue, but lit by wonder at the planet's marvels. He had come to gather parts for the Nebula Runner's navigation system, but, as always, he could not resist the chance to explore. A breeze sighed across the metallic canyons, stirring the exotic scents of spiced vegetables and rare pulses used in Velkari cooking. Ethan paused beside one stall to inspect an alien delicacy, a vibrant cluster of tangy tubers rumored to energize the mind. He felt the proprietor's curious gaze upon him, a lithe Velkari whose skin bore a faint lilac hue and eyes that glowed with fleeting luminescence. Their accent was thick but pleasant. Ethan haggled, his Terran credits held in a small pouch, determined to secure the delicacy at a fair rate. It was while concluding his purchase that he turned and collided, ever so slightly, with someone stepping away from a neighboring stall. In that single heartbeat, the entire marketplace seemed to hush, as if the cosmic tapestry had gathered its threads for a grand reveal. The individual was a Velkari woman, cloaked in fine, translucent fabrics that glittered with embedded crystals. Her hair, an opalescent shade of white, hung in intricate braids that framed a delicate face. And upon that face, Ethan saw an expression of equal parts shock and something else, astonishment. He barely had time to sputter an apology before gasps rippled through the market crowd, for her slender wrist had begun to glow with the faint pulsation of an ornate device. Their eyes met, human and Velkari, and, in that instant, a bond was forged, quite literally, by the surging glow from the device upon her arm. It was no ordinary trinket. A hush fell around them, the once bustling thoroughfare going silent, as though every onlooker collectively held their breath. Ethan's heart pounded at the sudden intensity, and the woman stepped back, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. "How?" she whispered, lips parted. Her voice trembled with astonishment. Ethan swallowed. I'm sorry. Are you hurt?" She blinked, as though his words rang from a place she had never considered. Velkari protocol taught that the match indicator, a revered item, reacted only when certain fateful conditions were met. Under normal circumstances, no human had the capacity to activate such a sacred mechanism, yet it glowed against her wrist, pulsing like a heartbeat. A ripple moved through the crowd. Concerned faces, shocked exclamations, and hushed murmurs spread in widening circles. The Velkari recognized the phenomenon for what it was, the fate bond, and yet the one who triggered it was a human? The woman, struggling for composure, managed to speak. "My name is Lyara Vexis," she said, voice catching on every syllable. "And this is impossible." Her large eyes fixed upon Ethan's worn jacket, his patch bearing the Nebula Runner's insignia. "No human has ever." She cut herself off, eyes drifting back to the glowing device. Some nearby Velkari hurried forward, among them individuals in elaborate robes, the swirling sigils of priests or advisors. They encircled the pair. More than curiosity touched their faces. There was reverence, shock, a bit of outrage, even fear. Someone muttered, "It can't be," while another hissed with suspicion. Ethan simply raised his hands in placation, though he barely understood what was transpiring. At last, a tall figure with imposing presence stepped into the circle. The lines of age and authority on his face indicated that he was an elder of sorts, perhaps a dignitary or someone close to Lyara's family. "Ethan Drake," said Lyara, her voice trembling only slightly. "This is Joran Relis, counselor to my house. I must take you to our estate. We must see if there is an explanation." Ethan nodded, his heart thundering. He held no illusions that this was an ordinary misunderstanding. He had glimpsed enough cultures to know that certain traditions remained ironclad. If he had offended them, or unwittingly stepped into a realm of deep taboo, the outcome could be dire. Yet he also felt an odd stirring of curiosity, an intuition that perhaps the swirl of events was beyond mere accident. Thus, in a swirl of solemn ceremony, Ethan found himself guided away from the bustling market. The watchers stepped aside, whispering among themselves. In the distance, tall spires and shimmering domes reflected the golden sun. Velkaris Prime, renowned for its beauty and sophistication, now felt ominous, cloaked in layers of tradition he barely comprehended. Saying nothing, Ethan let them lead him toward a waiting transport. Lyara glided beside him, her expression forcibly neutral, though her luminous eyes betrayed a tempest of emotions. The transport, sleek and gilded, whisked them through the city's labyrinth of elevated pathways, weaving between towers of crystalline metal that sparkled in the midday light. Far below, monorail lines and communal squares bustled with alien life. Overhead, hovercraft moved in orderly precision, their engines humming a gentle chord in the planet's carefully orchestrated symphony. Finally, they arrived at the Vexis estate, a sprawling complex that combined modern architecture and ancient grandeur. Delicate spires rose into the air, accented by gracefully arching beams, while ornamental gardens displayed lush, bioluminescent flora from the planet's various provinces. Ethan found himself escorted into a reception hall, and there he was asked to wait in a marble foyer whose polished floors gleamed like starlight. Lyara disappeared into a side chamber, presumably to inform others in her house about what had happened. Now alone, Ethan tried to quell the unease that stirred within him. He was a stranger here, uncertain of local custom, unsure of the consequences for having unwittingly triggered the glowing device. It dawned on him that he had never once asked to see the device or inquired as to its purpose. He only knew it was important enough to provoke a stunned reaction from everyone around them. After a tense interval, soft footsteps signaled Lyara's return. She wore a slight frown, her face etched with worry. It was the expression of someone caught between duty and personal desire. She approached him with a formal nod. "Ethan Drake," she said, with forced calm. "I have explained to my house that you are an outsider, unfamiliar with our ancient traditions, yet the device clearly reacted. They have asked that you remain in our guest quarters, under respectful observation, until we can determine the validity of what has transpired. I am sorry if this inconveniences you. I can only imagine how unsettling this must be." Ethan cleared his throat. "I'll do whatever is necessary to clear up any confusion." He paused, studying her anxious eyes. "But, may I ask, what is that thing on your wrist exactly? Why did it glow like that?" Lyara's gaze flickered to the shimmering band, its embedded gems still faintly lit. She took a measured breath, as though reciting lines from a sacred text. "It is our fate bond indicator," she said, voice hushed. "In Velkari culture, when two individuals destined for companionship, sometimes marriage, come into contact, the device resonates with their mutual essence. It is an ancient creation, woven from living crystals that respond to subconscious energies. It only responds to a pair that can forge a unique bond. Traditionally, it is reserved for highborn Velkari, signifying alliances between noble houses." Her voice trembled, a slight bitterness creeping in. "No human has ever been part of this process. Until today." Her words trailed off, leaving Ethan stunned. "That can't be right," he said softly. "It must be some kind of glitch." Lyara shook her head. "It has never malfunctioned. Even the possibility of an error is, for us, unthinkable." For a long moment, they stood in silence, each with their own thoughts. Then Liara's face softened. "Come," she said, inclining her head. "I'll show you to the guest wing." And so, in a stately, echoing corridor lined with sculptures of legendary Velkari heroes, Ethan followed the graceful figure of Lyara. His footsteps resonated against the polished floors. The hush of the corridor enveloped them, broken only by the subtle hum of hidden technology that regulated the temperature and lighting. Everything about the place hinted at wealth, tradition, and an unyielding sense of propriety. After a short walk, they arrived at a suite of rooms that exceeded any accommodations Ethan had ever experienced. The plush interior shimmered with the same opalescent glow he had glimpsed in Liara's braided hair. A wide balcony, draped with translucent curtains, overlooked a courtyard of flowering bushes that shimmered in pastel shades. She gestured to the elegant chamber. "Please, make yourself comfortable. Someone will bring a meal soon, and if you need anything, simply press the call button on the wall." A faint flush of color touched her cheeks as she added, "I apologize for any confusion or for the manner in which you have been treated. However, there are protocols to be observed, especially with an event as unprecedented as this." He offered her a slight, reassuring smile. "Thank you. I appreciate your hospitality." Before she left, she paused, glancing down at her wrist. The device shimmered, its light waning and then brightening rhythmically, like a cosmic heartbeat. "I am no more at ease than you are," she confessed. "I never wished for any of this. But, sometimes, our wishes are overshadowed by the weight of tradition." Then she departed, leaving Ethan to stare after her, his heart racing with the tumult of possibilities. He ran a hand through his hair, gazing around the lavish guest suite. Soft furnishings, drapes that danced in the slightest breeze, and quietly humming fixtures that emanated a pleasing aroma. Everything spoke of wealth and refinement. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in hues of pink and orange. He took in a deep breath, stepping onto the balcony to admire the courtyard. Statues of Velkari ancestors stood in silent guard, and the flowering shrubs swayed with a whisper of wind. He tried to reflect calmly on the day's events. The strange device, the involuntary hush of the crowd, Liara's startled eyes. This was no trivial misunderstanding. He understood that the entire planet might be in an uproar over the notion that a Terran, an ordinary mechanic, had triggered an ancient matchmaking device meant for nobility. He leaned against the balcony rail, wondering if the Nebula Runner's captain would be worried. He had told them he would be back by early evening with the purchased components. Now, that timeline seemed laughable. He was ensnared in something bigger, a cosmic tapestry woven of tradition, duty, and fateful connection. Part of him wanted to flee, to disclaim any role in the matter. Yet something else, an inexplicable stirring, urged him to remain. Eventually, evening settled across the estate, bathing the spires in soft moonlight. Ethan tried to sleep, but his dreams were filled with flickering images of alien architecture, glowing bracelets, and the echo of Liara's voice. When he awoke to the subtle light of dawn, the day offered no immediate answers. Instead, attendants arrived with a sumptuous breakfast, served on silver trays, presenting him with steaming bowls of aromatic grains and fruit slices that shimmered with an internal luminescence. The attendants said little, only that Lady Lyara and others will speak with you soon. As Ethan ate, he wrestled with the question of how to extricate himself. More puzzling was the device's unwavering reaction. Could it truly sense something between him and Lyara? At mid-morning, the hush of the corridor outside his suite was broken by gentle knocks. Opening the door, Ethan found Lyara, accompanied by Joran Rellis, the counselor he had met briefly the day before. They stepped inside with a sense of formal gravity, and Ethan braced himself. "We have made arrangements for a formal audience before the High Council of Velkaris," Joran said, his voice possessing the crisp, commanding tone of an elder statesman. "Lady Lyara has the right to invoke the right of confirmation to prove the authenticity of the fate bond." Lyara, standing at Joran's side, dipped her head in acknowledgement. "The right is a test," she explained gently. It involves evaluating how well two individuals resonate with one another's essence, measured by a specialized mechanism at the behest of the Council. Should the right confirm the device's verdict, there would be obligations, marital obligations. She exhaled softly, though her posture remained poised. Obligations, Ethan repeated, his throat dry. And if it doesn't confirm? If it's, I don't know, inconclusive? Lyara's gaze flickered. Then we will all be free from the device's claim, and we may dismiss the anomaly as a malfunction or an unexplained phenomenon, though the latter is improbable. Either way, the right of confirmation settles disputes. Ethan ran a hand across the back of his neck, grappling with the complexity of this. And what if I refuse to participate? Joran Rellis arched a brow. That would be unwise. The device's reaction is a matter of great cultural importance. If you walk away now, you may be seen as dishonoring our most sacred tradition. You could bring disrepute upon yourself, even endangering your safety should certain factions view you as a violator of the cosmic law. It is best, for your own welfare, that you comply. Ethan stood silent, weighed down by the caution in Joran's words. He could see that Lyara was also caught in the same trap. Neither of them had asked for this, yet both felt compelled to follow the path laid out before them. Finally, Ethan exhaled. All right, let's do it. A faint, grateful smile touched Lyara's lips, though Ethan noted a flicker of sadness. Perhaps she, too, dreaded the outcome, whatever it might be. So began the morning that would see Ethan Drake, humble mechanic, stand before the High Council of Velkaris. Escorted once again by robed attendants, he traveled through the estate's labyrinth of corridors and emerged into a grand courtyard. An ornate skimmer vehicle awaited them, floating a mere foot above the polished tile. Joran, Lyara, and Ethan boarded. Guards and staff flanked either side, maintaining a respectful silence. The skimmer glided out of the estate and into the central city, weaving through broad avenues lined with towers that seemed carved from living crystal. The flicker of midday sunlight on so many reflective surfaces gave the metropolis an otherworldly sheen. At last, they arrived at a grand assembly hall, a colossal structure whose facade displayed centuries of Velkari art. Statues and carvings depicted the mythic founders of the domain, each figure cloaked in cosmic robes, arms outstretched in acts of creation or discovery. Inside the hall, the air was hushed and solemn. Dim, ambient lighting illuminated the central dais where the council convened. Rows of dignitaries, minor nobles, and curious onlookers filled seats that rose in tiers behind the dais. At its heart stood a circular platform inscribed with pulsating glyphs, lines of shimmering script that radiated from the center like a spider's web. Ethan's heart thudded as they led him to stand upon the platform. Lyara stepped up beside him, her expression subdued but resolute. Joran took his place among other advisors who stood just beyond. Drifting quietly from the side, a tall figure in elaborate robes approached. This was Counselor Heiress, an elder with stern eyes and a regal bearing. He surveyed Ethan with an inscrutable gaze, then nodded at Lyara. Lady Lyara Vexis, the device has registered an unprecedented reaction, linking you with this human, Ethan Drake, Counselor Heiress intoned. We must invoke the right of confirmation, to see if the fates indeed align you, or if this is a deception or malfunction. Lyara bowed. I stand ready, Counselor. Ethan did his best to mimic her reverential posture, though his heart pounded. There was something about this place, its monumental architecture and the hush of so many watchers, that made him feel like a trespasser. Yet, beyond his anxiety, a strange sense of wonder stirred in him. He remembered the dreamlike vision of that device's glow, and how something in his core had quietly responded. He could not articulate it, but some intangible piece of him felt drawn to Lyara. Around them, robed attendants activated a series of crystalline pillars that encircled the dais. The glyphs on the floor brightened, and a soft hum reverberated in the chamber. Thin beams of shimmering light rose upward, forming a translucent dome that encompassed both Ethan and Lyara. Within the dome, Ethan noticed faint motes of energy swirling like fireflies. Counselor Heiress spoke again, his voice echoing. We shall see if your essences truly align. Stand as you are, and let the rite commence. Lyara swallowed. Ethan could see her tension as she clasped her hands together, the device on her wrist glowing in perfect rhythm with the luminous dome. He, too, tried to remain calm, though the swirl of energy around them tickled the edges of his senses. The swirling lights danced faster, coalescing into shifting patterns. Then, with an almost inaudible chime, they pulsed in unison with the device. A hush fell over the crowd. Ethan could feel a resonance in his chest, a warmth that peaked every time the device glowed. He looked at Lyara, finding her gaze fixed upon the swirling lights, her lips parted in awe. Gradually, the dome's swirling energies converged into a single, brilliant shaft of light that shot upward, piercing the assembly hall's vaulted ceiling. The color changed from pale white to rose gold, the glow suffusing the entire dais in a radiant aura. Counselor Thanaris's voice trembled with reverence. The rite of confirmation is complete. The reading is undeniable. The fate bond between Lady Lyara and Ethan Drake is authentic. A wave of murmurs spread through the onlookers. Ethan's thoughts reeled. He felt both exhilaration and dread. Lyara closed her eyes, as though trying to embrace or reject the truth. Then Heiress lifted a hand for silence. In accordance with our tradition, a confirmed fate bond indicates that the pair is destined for a union of spirit and, eventually, matrimony. However, due to the unprecedented nature of one participant being human, we shall require additional observation. There are to be trials of worthiness, ensuring that Ethan Drake can stand among our nobility. Only upon completion of these trials shall the union be sanctioned. The hum of the dome subsided, and the beams of light vanished. With a final resonant chime, the dais went still. Ethan realized that the council had imposed yet another challenge. Some part of him had hoped that if the rite showed an error, he would be free. Another part had begun to wonder if the result would stand. Now, the verdict was undeniable. His presence had activated a device and completed a cosmic rite. It was real. He turned his gaze to Lyara. She looked shaken, but also quietly resolved, a glimmer in her eyes that might have been hope or anxiety or both. He reached out and gently touched her arm. Despite the commotion of the crowd, she felt steady beneath his fingers, as though her presence could anchor him in this storm. Counselor Heiress concluded, "We shall convene soon to announce the nature of these trials. Prepare yourselves." And with that, the session ended. The dome flickered off completely. Onlookers buzzed with commentary, their voices a chorus of speculation. Joran Relis and several attendants hurried forward to escort Lyara and Ethan from the dais, weaving through the crowd as best they could. Outside, midday light bathed the steps of the assembly hall. Guards stood at attention, and the press of curious citizens looked on from a distance. They boarded the skimmer again, and the journey back to the Vexis estate passed in fraught silence. Lyara gazed out at the crystalline spires, lost in her thoughts, while Ethan remained troubled by the weight of the day's revelations. He could not pretend that any aspect of this was normal, or that he felt prepared to endure a series of trials. But he also realized that retreat was not an option. To vanish now would be to disgrace Lyara, possibly incite the Velkari's anger, and perhaps upset the cosmic forces that had stirred this phenomenon in the first place. Upon returning to the estate, Joran addressed Ethan in a side chamber. The elder's typically composed face seemed tense, as though the revelations had tested even him. "The trials," he explained, "are not idle. They date back centuries and were designed for Velkari nobles to prove their lineage and abilities. They test character, wisdom, and skill. Usually, another Velkari suitor competes for the same bond, though it has been generations since we invoked them in earnest. The House of Vexis has a prominent name. As Lady Lyara's suitor, you must stand against others who have vied for her hand." "Others?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You mean she has a rival suitor?" At that moment, Lyara appeared in the threshold, arms folded. "Kelor," she said, her voice tinged with controlled distaste. "He is from a rival house, one that seeks to forge an alliance with mine. He has courted me in the formal sense for some time, but the device never glowed for him. Perhaps he believed that simply persuading my father and the other elders would override the device's silence. But now that the device has reacted, to you, of all possibilities, Kelor will not stand idly by. He will demand these trials be held, to give him the chance to defeat you and claim me." Her cheeks were tinted with frustration at that final phrase. "Claim me," she repeated bitterly. as though I were a prize. But such is the archaic tradition. Ethan frowned. So, he'll be my opponent in these trials? Joran nodded solemnly. Yes. Kelor is influential, skilled, and quite cunning. He is also known for his ambition. You must be prepared, for he will not fight fair. Yet, in principle, the trials themselves are to be safeguarded by the Council's oversight, ensuring fairness. We shall see. Lyara met Ethan's eyes. I never wanted to be bound to him, nor to any suitor thrust upon me by familial deals. This chance, this bizarre, impossible fate bond with you, may actually be my only path to personal freedom. If you succeed in the trials, it may help me carve a new path, away from the constraints that have plagued me all my life. Should you fail, she trailed off, her eyes clouded. A surge of empathy coursed through Ethan. He had been thrust into an unimaginable situation, but so had Lyara, from the other side of the cosmic coin. Bound by birth and tradition, she had long been forced to adhere to rules that stifled her own choices. Now, ironically, the arrival of an unassuming human had unlocked a potential new destiny. He wanted to help, though the enormity of the challenge was staggering. He squared his shoulders. Then I'll do my best, he said simply. Just tell me how. Lyara's lips curved into a faint, grateful smile. Thank you. Joran considered the two of them for a moment, then stated, we must prepare you with all the knowledge we can provide. The Council will likely schedule the trials soon. We will have little time. Over the next few days, the Vexis estate became a hive of activity. Advisors, tutors, and even physical trainers came to Ethan's quarters, helping him understand Velkari customs, the structure of the trials, and the symbolic significance behind each challenge. Lyara was often present, guiding him through the labyrinth of etiquette and tradition. Through these lessons, Ethan learned that the trials tested multiple facets: mental acuity, martial prowess, empathy, and wisdom, and an ability to navigate riddles of leadership. Each segment was steeped in centuries-old ritual, meant to expose the deeper qualities of a potential mate. While any typical Velkari noble grew up studying these traditions, Ethan had mere days to learn them. Lyara watched with an encouraging demeanor, despite the seriousness of the situation. When he struggled to remember genealogies or stumbled over complex cultural references, she would gently correct him. In brief moments of respite, they would talk about their respective backgrounds, her isolated childhood within the gilded constraints of House Vexis, his adventures on the Nebula Runner, drifting from planet to planet with no grand ambition. These glimpses of one another's inner selves bridged the gulf between their worlds. One afternoon, while he practiced a ritual dance used in ceremonial greetings, Ethan found himself laughing at his own clumsy steps. To his surprise, Lyara joined in, her silvery hair swaying as she attempted to demonstrate. Their laughter echoed off polished stone walls, a moment of shared camaraderie that defied the tension of their situation. Yet, amid all the instruction, a shadow loomed. Kelor, the rival suitor, made no secret of his disdain for the unworthy Terran. Word reached the estate that he practiced daily in the House of Rithun's training halls, boasting that he would crush the barbarian in the trials. The rumors also hinted that Kelor had powerful allies, some within the Council, who might covertly ensure his victory. Even Counselor then Heiress, though outwardly neutral, had a vested interest in preserving the purity of Velkari lineage and might be susceptible to persuasion. In the midst of these swirling tensions, Ethan clung to his sense of fairness. Though he had never sought this conflict, nor the prospective union with Lyara, he respected the bond that had awakened between them. Perhaps, on some deeper plane, they were indeed connected. With that thread of determination, he poured himself into preparation. At last, the day came when the Council summoned them to the Hall of Trials, a vast dome situated in the central district of Velkaris Prime. The structure was encircled by high walls carved with symbols representing each of the trials. Inside, a carefully designed arena awaited, with multiple sections dedicated to testing different skills. The area was large enough to house an audience of aristocrats, council members, and curious citizens who came to witness history in the making. For how often did a human stand in these trials? And for an heiress of House Vexis, no less. Ethan and Lyara arrived in a regal transport, once again flanked by House Vexis's retinue. In the antechamber, attendants fitted Ethan with light ceremonial armor, its inlaid patterns reflecting the Vexis crest. Lyara fastened a short cloak around his shoulders, smoothing out any wrinkles, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You look the part," she told him, voice hushed. "But remember, formality can only take you so far. Trust your instincts." That is something the Velkari find difficult to predict, especially someone like Kelor, who believes everything can be calculated and manipulated. Ethan nodded. "I appreciate that." With that, they proceeded into the main arena, stepping onto pale stones that bore lines of intricate designs. Rising tiers of seating curved around them, filled with robed spectators. At the far side, raised on a platform, sat the council, then Heiress at the center, robed figures to each side. Across the arena stood Kelor, tall and imposing, clad in gleaming armor of black and silver. A smug grin lingered on his sharp features, and his dark hair was bound in an elaborate style, accentuating his proud cheekbones. His eyes burned with contempt as they landed on Ethan. A herald's voice boomed across the dome. "By order of the Velkari High Council, the trials of the Fate Bond shall commence. We gather to test the worthiness of Ethan Drake, human, against Kelor of House Rithian. Victory shall confirm the bond between Lady Lyara Vexis and the triumphant suitor. Let no one interfere with the trials once they have begun." A hush fell. Counselor then Heiress stood, lifting both hands. "The trial shall consist of 4 stages, each designed to measure aspects of a prospective mate's character and skill. The first is the trial of mind, to test acuity and strategy. The second is the trial of spirit, measuring empathy and moral judgment. The third is the trial of arms, evaluating martial prowess. Lastly, the trial of union, which reveals the synergy between suitor and the lady in question. Let the contenders step forward." Ethan moved to the center, heart pounding. Kelor strode forth with confidence, offering a cursory bow toward the council but ignoring Ethan's presence. The crowd murmured, leaning forward in anticipation. Then Heiress inclined his head. "We begin. Trial of mind." At the herald's signal, the floor of the arena shifted. Panels slid aside, revealing a glowing table of sorts, etched with labyrinthine patterns. Ethan and Kelor approached, each taking a seat on opposite sides. Small holographic pieces and runic markers materialized above the table, forming what looked like an intricate game board with swirling shapes. Ethan had trained for this in the preceding days. It was called Velkaris Conundrum, a classic Velkari puzzle that involved forethought, logic, and adaptability. Kelor smirked, making the first move with practiced ease. The floating pieces danced as he rearranged them. Ethan furrowed his brow, recalling the sequences taught to him by the House Vexis tutors. He countered, adjusting the runic markers to disrupt Kelor's pattern. For several turns, they seemed evenly matched, but as the puzzle deepened, Kelor began deploying advanced strategies that forced Ethan onto the defensive. Ethan, however, noticed a vulnerability in Kelor's method. He overcommit to a single strategy. Gritting his teeth, Ethan made a calculated risk, sacrificing certain pieces to bait Kelor into overextension. To the crowd's astonishment, Kelor took the bait, seeking a quick victory, only to find himself cornered. In a final flourish, Ethan arranged his pieces to lock Kelor's game state, preventing further progress. A glow of triumphant light encompassed Ethan's side of the board. The herald raised his arms. The first round concludes with Ethan Drake's victory. A ripple of applause spread through the onlookers, some in genuine admiration, others in stunned surprise. Kelor's face twisted in anger. He glared at Ethan, but Ethan simply bowed his head politely toward the council. Lyara, watching from the sidelines, exhaled with relief, her eyes shining with excitement. Trial of spirit. For the second test, the table vanished, replaced by what appeared to be a large, circular pool of shimmering liquid. Illuminated by overhead crystals, it reflected shifting patterns on the dome's walls. An attendant explained that each suitor would be plunged into a simulated realm within the pool, an immersive psychic illusion that tested moral judgment. The suitors would face moral dilemmas, responding with their innermost character. Ethan felt a strange jolt as a harness was attached to him, ensuring he would not drown. Then, upon the herald's instruction, he slipped into the liquid. It felt warm, strangely comforting, as he sank. His vision went dark. Suddenly, he stood in a surreal landscape, a half-formed city under siege by intangible forces. Screams echoed from unseen inhabitants, their silhouettes flickering like shadows. A child's voice rang out, "Help me! My mother is trapped." Another voice, "Save the medical supplies, or more will die." Ethan realized the illusions were presenting him with urgent, conflicting priorities. On one side, the child's mother was pinned under debris. On the other, vital medical supplies were on the verge of destruction. He had only seconds to choose. His chest tightened. The illusions looked so real. He dashed to free the mother first, reasoning that a life at immediate risk took priority. It took great effort, illusions swirling, but he pulled the debris away. Then he darted to secure the medical supplies, using a nearby cart to haul them away from encroaching flames. The illusions shifted, presenting new crises. Some demanded swift action to save individuals, while others offered broader, more strategic solutions to help entire groups. Ethan tried to balance compassion for individuals with the bigger picture. The illusions grew more complex, forcing him to weigh the sacrifice of a few for the benefit of many. At last, the illusions subsided, and he found himself blinking, half submerged in the shimmering liquid. He gasped for air as attendants helped him out. His eyes met those of Lyara, who watched anxiously from the edge. Then, the liquid pool rippled again, and Kelor immersed himself, sinking to face his own illusions. For long minutes, the crowd waited in tense silence. When Kelor emerged, he looked rattled. His expression was dark, as though haunted by the illusions. Attendants consulted a reading device attached to the pool. Their eyes widened. The herald stepped forward. The readings indicate that both contenders exhibited the willingness to save lives, but Ethan Drake demonstrated greater compassion and balance of priorities, whereas Kelor's decisions leaned toward preserving resources and strategizing for personal gain, occasionally neglecting immediate pleas for help. A mix of hushed discussion and stifled gasps rose from the audience. Kelor scowled, though he said nothing. Counselor Heiress nodded gravely. Hence, in the trial of spirit, Ethan Drake surpasses Kelor. A wave of excitement ran through Ethan. He was 2 trials ahead. If he won another, Kelor's final opportunity would be moot. But he quelled his growing sense of triumph, mindful that Kelor had not yet displayed his greatest strength, martial prowess. Trial of arms. Immediately, the arena rearranged again. Sections of the floor retracted, revealing a wide combat circle lined with glowing glyphs. Attendants presented weapons to both contenders, staff-like implements that could extend energy blades from each end. Kelor tested his with a flourish, a confident, predatory gleam in his eyes. Ethan recalled his training with the House Vexis instructors. While he had some experience in basic self-defense from his life as a drifter, Kelor was known for mastering the Velkari energy staff. This was likely to be the toughest test. Counselor Heiress stood, voice commanding. Contenders shall fight with staff blades at mid-level energy output. A lethal blow is neither intended nor permissible, but serious injury may still occur. The first to disarm or incapacitate the other shall be declared the victor. The crowd went silent. Lyara watched from the sidelines, her fists clenched at her sides. Then, with a signal from the herald, the trial of arms began. Kelor darted forward, staff blazing, unleashing a flurry of strikes at Ethan's torso. Ethan parried, the clash of energy humming sharply. Sparks flew as blade met blade, sending arcs of crackling light across the glyph-lined floor. Kelor's movements were swift and fluid, honed from years of practice. Ethan, struggling to keep pace, nearly lost his grip when Kelor spun, slicing downward. Summoning his resolve, Ethan crouched low and pivoted, using the staff's length to keep Kelor at a slight distance. He forced himself to stay calm, to analyze Kelor's patterns as if he were diagnosing a machine's malfunction. Observing the suitor's footwork, Ethan spotted a small hesitation before each overhead strike. When Kelor attempted another overhead blow, Ethan anticipated it. He sidestepped, hooking his staff under Kelor's arm to wrench him off balance. Kelor staggered, but quickly recovered, snarling in frustration. Lashing out again, Kelor pushed forward aggressively, forcing Ethan to retreat. The strikes rained down mercilessly, forcing Ethan onto one knee. A hush ran through the crowd. It looked as though Ethan might fall. Lyara bit her lip, her heart pounding. But in a flash of inspiration, Ethan swept his staff low, forcing Kelor to leap. While Kelor was in midair, Ethan rolled to the side and whipped the staff around, clipping Kelor's ankle. Kelor landed awkwardly, cursing. Sensing an opening, Ethan sprang forward, delivering a blow intended to knock the staff from Kelor's hands. But Kelor twisted, deflecting Ethan's strike with a sharp clang. Suddenly, he dropped low to sweep Ethan's legs. Ethan tumbled, hitting the ground hard, jarring his bones. The crowd gasped. Pain flared in his chest, but he refused to yield. He rolled aside just as Kelor's staff hissed downward. The blade cut a scorch mark into the arena floor. Summoning the last reserves of his energy, Ethan launched upward, staff aimed at Kelor's midsection. Kelor snarled, deflecting partially, but Ethan's staff connected with Kelor's forearm. There was a flash of sparks, and Kelor's staff flew from his grasp, skittering across the floor. The stunned silence of the crowd stretched for a fraction of a second, then thunderous applause erupted. The herald's voice boomed, declaring Ethan the victor. Collapsing to one knee, Ethan panted from the exertion. Kelor stood, fuming, eyes blazing with hatred. The attendants collected both staffs, ensuring no further conflict. Lyara rushed forward, helping Ethan to his feet. Tears glistened in her eyes, though she smiled in relief. "You did it," she whispered, voice breaking on the words. He nodded, breathless, astonished at having overcome such a formidable opponent. From his vantage on the dais, Counselor Heiress spoke, projecting his voice over the crowd's exclamations. "Ethan Drake has won 3 trials, demonstrating mind, spirit, and arms that surpass those of Kelor. According to our traditions, this is sufficient to declare him worthy of bonding with Lady Lyara Vexis. However, there remains the final test, the trial of union. We shall proceed to confirm that the synergy between Ethan Drake and Lady Lyara is genuine." The crowd murmured, though many believed that 3 victories were more than enough. Kelor, now smoldering with humiliation, stepped back into the shadows, his allies whispering urgently to him. Yet the council decreed that the last trial would happen at once. The herald gestured toward the center of the arena, where new devices were being placed, crystal columns and a dais reminiscent of the rite of confirmation. Trial of union. Lyara approached Ethan, who still fought to steady his breathing. She clasped his hands in hers, ignoring the watching crowd. Her slender fingers trembled. "This test," she said softly, "will measure how well we harmonize, mind to mind and spirit to spirit. We'll stand upon the dais together and permit it to read our combined energies. If our synergy fails, everything we've done may be for nothing." He squeezed her hands gently. "We can do this." Together, they stepped onto the dais. A hush settled in the arena. Even Kelor looked on with grim anticipation. At a signal from Counselor Heiress, the crystal columns activated, pulsing with colored light. A soft hum resonated, forming a bubble of radiant energy that enclosed Ethan and Lyara. Within that glow, Ethan felt warmth. He sensed Lyara's presence on a deeper level, as though the vibrations of her heartbeat were reaching him. Slowly, the glow intensified, swirling around them in layers of pink and gold. He let his barriers down, thinking of the connection that might exist between them. He recalled the moment in the marketplace, the cosmic hush when they first touched and the device pulsed. He remembered her gentle guidance through the estate, her readiness to help him learn. He pictured her laughter during practice sessions. In that swirl of memory, he felt gratitude, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of something else, something that felt like love. Lyara gazed into his eyes, tears gathering on her lashes. The swirling light amplified, pulsing in sync with the device on her wrist. The crowd watched, enthralled, as the glow morphed into a single, scintillating beam that shot skyward. It punctured the top of the dome, scattering shimmering motes of energy like stars overhead. A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Counselor Heiress leaned forward, the shock evident on his face. "The synergy is perfectly aligned." A wave of awe swept the arena. The bubble of light receded, leaving Ethan and Lyara standing hand in hand. For a moment, all was still. Then the crowd erupted in applause, cheers, and jubilant exclamations. It was as though a centuries-old barrier had been shattered by the simple union of a human and a Velkari noble. The herald proclaimed, "The trials are complete. Ethan Drake and Lady Lyara Vexis are confirmed in the fate bond." Ethan exhaled, heart swelling with relief and triumph. Lyara gazed at him, her expression a mixture of joy, disbelief, and profound gratitude. The entire crowd's eyes were upon them. She lifted her wrist, where the device glowed steadily, and stepped forward. Ethan understood, without words, that this was the moment they sealed their union before the Velkari tradition. He bowed his head and gently pressed his brow to hers, a sign of reverence in Velkari custom, as taught by his tutors. Over on the sidelines, Kelor seethed with defeat. Some of his allies tried to console him, but he angrily shrugged off their attempts. He stormed away before the ceremony concluded, leaving the crowd to rejoice in the spectacle that had just unfolded. By evening, the story had spread across Velkaris Prime. A human, Ethan Drake, had passed every trial, proving worthy of the fate bond with Lady Lyara Vexis. Celebrations ignited across the city, fueled by curiosity and excitement. Rumors swirled. Some saw it as a sign that the Velkari were entering a new era, less bound by insular traditions. Others whispered that House Vexis might unify with outsiders, forging unprecedented alliances. None could ignore the wonder they felt at seeing the device, so long revered, glow for someone who hailed from beyond Velkari bloodlines. In the days that followed, the council formally endorsed the union. The rite of union, a smaller but deeply personal ceremony, took place in the Vexis estate's grand courtyard. Surrounded by luminescent flowers and watched by the eyes of the noble houses, Ethan and Lyara exchanged vows. Her father, though initially displeased by the disruption of tradition, gradually conceded that the device's verdict was unassailable. A wave of supporters rallied to them, while some older, more conservative voices grumbled in private. For Ethan and Lyara, it was a surreal experience, joined not merely by a cosmic device, but by genuine admiration for one another. In the hush of the courtyard on the evening of the union, as moonlight bathed the shimmering petals, Lyara approached Ethan in a delicate, flowing dress adorned with crystals. He wore a fitted attire that bore the stylized crest of House Vexis, though he felt more comfortable with an old flight jacket thrown over his shoulders at the last minute. She laughed softly when she saw that jacket. "Never change," she murmured, placing her hand gently on his chest. They sealed their bond as the gathered crowd cheered, the device on Lyara's wrist pulsing in a final flourish of light, as though to bless their union. Joran Relis stood nearby, pride shining in his eyes. And though many guests attended, none seemed more radiant than the bride herself, relieved of the burden that had once threatened to force her into a loveless match. Later that night, while strolling through the glowing gardens, Ethan felt Lyara's hand slip into his. Soft petals brushed against their ankles. He sensed her contentment, as if centuries of tension had lifted from her shoulders. The courtyard was bathed in the soft hush of a warm breeze. Overhead, stars glittered, each an invitation to further cosmic adventures. She faced him, her luminous eyes reflecting starlight. "I never dreamed I'd find freedom in such a way," she said, voice quavering with emotion. "You were the last person I expected, yet the only one who awakened the fate bond." She paused, smiling. "Thank you, Ethan Drake, for not running away." He pressed a tender kiss to her fingertips. "It seems we both found more than we bargained for." He tilted his head, gazing out at the city skyline. "I'm just a mechanic, Lyara. I don't pretend to know what the future holds. But for once, I'm excited to find out." She stepped closer, letting the folds of her gown brush against him. He wrapped an arm around her waist, the sweet scent of the night blossoms enveloping them. In that quiet moment, they both understood that the threads of fate, woven so mysteriously, had brought them to a place neither could have foreseen. But it felt right, and it felt true. Beyond the walls of the estate, Velkaris Prime's bustling city carried on with its own tapestry of lights and life. Yet in that garden, at least, two souls found solace in each other, forging a bond that transcended galaxies, defied convention, and promised a new dawn for all who dared to dream. And so, in the hush of a star-kissed evening, Ethan Drake and Lyara Vexis began their shared journey, confident that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, hand in hand, hearts alight, forging a future not dictated by tradition alone, but by the very essence that first drew them together in the marketplace, that fleeting, impossible touch that changed everything.